Hello and welcome to Pulse, your podcast delving into all things health, innovation, digital and data. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. I'm your host, Louise Shaper.
And I'm your other host, George Marcellus.
George, there's so much for us to talk about today.
There is. Well, let me just say, Louise, the old saying is that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But today, we need to make an exception to that. I really want to hear about how you went at health. And I love the way they actually spell health without any vowels. What's that all about?
Well, that's the first thing I have to report is like we refer to it as health, and not just you and I. Like I've only ever heard people call it health, but it's health without the vowels. In America, they call it HLTH. So that was my first learning.
They do love their acronyms, don't they?
I know. I was like, see, Australians, we're too linguistically lazy. Like we got to shorten everything. HLTH just takes way too much muscular movements in my face to say. I'd much rather say health.
So tell us all about it. How was the experience?
Thanks. Well, okay, so here's a few thoughts. They say there's 12,000 people there. I thought it was a bit of a stretch, but I might be wrong. I'm not necessarily known for my spatial abilities. You are in this hotel, but the hotels in Vegas are massive. It was like being at a concert to try and get in the one door for the keynotes. And you enter, and even though it's in a hotel, basically you walk into an expo floor. So, it's concrete floor, massively tall ceilings, and there's all this production, and there's a massive stage up front. There's no tiered seating, and there's lights, camera action. And so it felt like I got like evangelical church type vibes.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. And look, I'm a fan of good production. I've always enjoyed that side of my previous life producing conferences. But yeah, it was quite over the top with the production. They had some really impressive speakers, very senior people and actual celebrities, not just like celebrities in the world of healthcare or digital health, but actual celebrities that everyone would know. So Halle Berry was on stage, Lenny Kravitz, some guy from NSYNC whose name I'm sorry, I don't remember. John Legend was there. So they had these actual celebrities. I was most excited about seeing Chelsea Clinton on stage, who was talking about reproductive rights. And, that's a bit of a hot topic in America right now.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah. So wearables and apps. So the Aura Ring, and this is something that is going to come to a lot of wearables now, because of AI, the data analytics engine behind these things, basically it can now give you a heads up that you're sick before you actually know. Like you think, oh, I feel fine. And then all of a sudden I'm starting to get a bit chilly or a bit achy. Well, before those chills and aches kick in, the watch will let you know that you're about to get sick. They've published studies on that now, so that was interesting. A lot of Pulse Potties would know about Noom. It's pretty much the most successful weight loss related app on the planet. Well, at the conference, they released an in-app body scanner. So basically, you just use the camera on your phone. There's a 10-second video that you take of yourself in your underwear, and it tells you your body composition, your measurements, your muscle mass, fat percentage. And I noticed they've changed the language from "we help you lose weight" to "we're committed to chronic disease prevention and empowering people to live better longer." So, companies like this, they're not now just jumping on the GLP-1 goldmine, but also showing this interest in a topic that you and I care a lot about, George, which is about preventive health and health span.
I would worry that Noom would have a semi-naked photo of me on their records they can use to make sure I keep my subscriptions going.
Yeah, there is that. I got one of those 3D body scans done for skin cancer, and I was insistent that they give me a copy of this 3D scan. I don't think anyone had ever asked for it before, but I insisted. And anyway, they gave it to me, and I looked at it once and I'm like, that's really confronting. I don't really know whether to see myself from a 360-degree angle all everywhere with bright lights. So anyway, but yes, Noom will, I guess, have those images now.
I assume it was at the Venetian, wasn't it? The big convention centre there, which is amazing venue. Did you go for a gondola ride?
I did not have time to go for a gondola ride, but I did see where they do them. So that was interesting. It was my public service announcement for the day. If you haven't been to Vegas before, as I hadn't, don't expect there's going to be like road signs that'll help you work out where to go. Don't anticipate that Google Maps will be a great deal of help, because basically to get anywhere, you have to like go into the hotel, and that's where there'll be signs. Like I was trying to find the monorail. It took me 30 minutes to find it, and Google was no help. And I kept going in the wrong direction. I realized, you just have to go through the hotel to get to it.
You have to follow the flashing lights.
Well, there is that, yes. And somehow they all tend to lead you to a roulette wheel. A couple other things I thought I'd say from the conference, some topics that were really on trend at this event and high profile was a lot of stuff on women's health, specifically menopause and fertility. That's why Hayley Berry was there. She's announced her new company, which is called Respin. She explained, because I didn't really get the name, but she explained that it's like when things need a rebrand, or in Hollywood and political circles, you put a spin on things. So she decided that menopause needed a respin. So she's basically rebranded menopause. I mentioned Chelsea Clinton talking about reproductive rights. And something I wrote down because I was quite impressed by it, actually. There was a panel I attended and some pretty big name venture capitalists on this panel. The panel, which was actually facilitated by an Australian venture capitalist who's based in New York. So the questions that she was asking was a lot about trends are you seeing in the market? What are you interested in? And this male investor said that he has found that skin contact is a poor indicator of what's going on in a female body. And he literally said it is a crime that all these wearables and all of this data that, I guess the startups are pitching to them, it's all based on male bodies and male data. And he called that a crime.
Interesting to hear. It gets a lot of visibility, the HLTH, as they call it. I've met Rich Scarbo, who's one of the founders of it, and interesting guy, some great concepts. It sort of is different to a lot of the other events. Don't know whether it would work in Australia. I know they've tried it over in Europe. I'm not quite sure how it went over there.
Yeah, Europe was much smaller, apparently. I mean, they did say it was their first time. Who was at the conference? Big tech players, so many startups, and a lot of investors. So I think it attracts a different market, and maybe the market is just not sophisticated yet as large in Europe, and certainly in Asia Pac as well.
And you would have visited my friends from the European Connected Health Alliance. They had their global village. How was that?
I did. They had a whole session, like 3/4 of a day, dedicated to the ECH Alliance. They had some really good speakers. Yes, and I met your friends and colleagues and made sure we did a selfie to send back to you, George, because that was very important. That was my one job I had to do at Health.
I appreciate that.
They had a booth. Well, they call them pavilions. So lots of different companies showcased in the ECH Alliance. Australia had one as well. I think there was about 30 odd Australians there. A lot of startups representing Australia. The UK had one, and also Korea.
Interesting. Hopefully one day I'll get over there. I mean, I don't mind Vegas. You're not a big fan, but I don't mind the place. Any place with unlimited buffets is one of my favourites.
Yeah. Well, hang on the food thing, they had a pavilion at Health called Food as Medicine. And I was like, after spending almost 3 weeks in America, I thought, well, that might be a bit of a lost cause. I don't know if America's ever going to, I had this really healthy, I thought, avocado toast for breakfast. And I was thinking, why would they put sugar on my avocado toast? That's like, I eat avocado toast all the time. I've had them all around the world. I eat them a lot in Melbourne. Never had sugar on it, but I'm like, okay, this is how they do it here. And on to my second slice, and I was really investigating where this source of sugar was coming from that I was ingesting. And I realized, it's in the bread.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So, yeah, the food is medicine. But the other thing I did find is our friend Matthew Holt took me as his +1 to a lot of the parties that all happened after hours. So I had a few late nights with Matthew. He was a wonderful host. But one of the things that I found is, when a company will put on a drinks or dinner event, there's certain selections you have to choose from. There's usually beer, wine, soft drink is what you might expect. Now, in America, full bar. So I had some really nice whiskies while I was there as well.
Fantastic. Well, I have to say, I've been pretty busy while you've been away as well.
Yeah, what have you been up to?
Last night, I actually went to the taping of Q&A where the health minister was one of the guests, along with a GP, a neurologist now in federal parliament, a nurse who used to be in state parliament, and some guy from the UK who was spruiking his book, and that's a whole different story. It was a little disappointing. Firstly, because A, my question wasn't selected. And secondly, because they focused on serious issues like primary care, mental health, women's health, and various other things. But they just kept on coming up with the same solution, spend more money. There was no discussion on innovation, improving efficiency, using digital. And that sort of is in stark contrast. So beforehand, I was in Melbourne for the Victorian Healthcare Week. And the Minister, Mark Butler, made a very impassioned speech about digital health. And he told us how they were making share by default the standard. He discussed how innovation using digital as a platform would be a major part of it. Yet on Q&A, they never got around to that. They just sort of focused on the money issue, which was a little disappointing. Also had the ACPA conference last week. 2,500 of my favourite aged care friends were all there talking about it. And we did have a little bit of a more focus on innovation. But again, that continuous discussion around funding models and how they cause challenges in Australia is there. I did chair a great panel on AI. And that was actually a sequel to the one I did last year. And the interesting thing is that even aged care, which is seen as a bit of a laggard industry, is really starting to jump on that AI bandwagon. So there's a lot of stuff happening in AI that we were looking at. And I know later next week, I'm attending the AI in Community Care Conference up in Brisbane. It'd be interesting to see, is AI getting to that maturity level where we're actually having real discussions rather than hype-driven discussions?
Yeah, that's interesting because, like you said, if it's the follow-up to the one you did last year, it's great people are talking about it, but are you hearing a lot of people actually taking action, actually using services that are AI enabled?
So interestingly, a lot of them sort of had a better understanding of the AI tools that are out there. So some use Copilot, some use Claude, some use the Google app, Gemini. There was that discussion around it. There was much more of a focus on what it does under the hood. So a lot of back-end stuff and how they're using it there to improve efficiencies and understandings there. A lot of people making comments that whatever they think of, they run it through the AI just to get a helping hand. So I think the more understanding of its augmentation capacity rather than its replacement capacity. Less discussion about it, is it going to take my job, and more discussion about, can it help me do my job better?
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, shall we move to our hot topics?
Let's go.
Well, George, we've talked about Apple on Pulse a number of times, so I thought it's about time we gave some love to Android. Well, I am pleased to say that Samsung has given us a reason to do so. Samsung Health, the native health app on Samsung phones, has had a serious upgrade. Along with the standard vitals, step counts, that sort of stuff that we're all used to seeing collected on our phones, it can collect and display information from Samsung's devices. So they've got their Galaxy Ring, the watch, and they've now got a Galaxy AI as well. But the new update is that the app now enables medication tracking and meal logging, and they require just the use of your smartphone camera. Both I thought were really interesting because of how they engage you, the user, with it. So things like monitoring your medications, notifying you of dosage schedules, warning you of contraindications, allergies, meds to avoid while pregnant, stuff like that. So we're not just talking like a nice filing system for your information, but actually really engaging you with it. They've also done a deal with Be Well Connected Health, a company that collects data from the large EMR systems in the US. So our US listeners will now be able to view their medical records, lab results, etc., directly in the Samsung Health app. Now, the official word from Samsung is that they aim to provide insights and recommendations based on the data with an emphasis on preventative care. Now, for you Pulse Potties who are Samsung users, you will find that the availability of these features will depend on where you live, which country you're in. But check it out and let us know what you think. This has got to be a good development, George, I think. Now, I have noted in the past when we've seen each other in person, you have one of those modern foldable phones. Is that a Samsung by any chance?
It is. I put in a disclaimer. I am a Samsung user, have been for a long time. I've always been a bit more of a fan of Android rather than Apple because of its supposedly open architecture, although things have changed over the last decade or so. And it's good to see Samsung coming back into the charge. We've seen some really interesting stories from Apple, and we've seen some interesting research coming out of Apple. So it'll be interesting to see whether our Korean colleagues can follow up on that. This idea of consolidating all the health records on your phone is exciting. I think, you have to recognize that most of us now carry some sort of smartphone around, and that's where we can consolidate it. And we have to take note that this wouldn't be possible if it hadn't been for the work of our good old Aussie mate, Graham Grieve, and his work on fire. So, we've seen innovation in Australia drive changes in other countries. Hint, hint, Australia, maybe we should play a much more active role here. Unfortunately, like you said, it seems to only be the US, and that probably reflects the 21st Century Care Act and how it's pushed towards interoperability. A couple of little concerns, I guess, whether this fragments, whether we have an Apple versus Samsung type medical record debate, and I guess that'll be something we need to keep an eye on. And I did have a little bit of a giggle at the disclaimer, The features should not be used to practice medicine or as the basis for medical decisions. So I guess,
Yep.
There's always that little sting in the tail that sort of says, this is pretty cool, but hey, no responsibility accepted. The medication and food tracking, that was pretty cool. I thought that was a good use of the camera type technology and barcodes. So positive note, great to have competition in that market. So we see the two big players pushing each other to do some interesting things. Interesting that Google and its Pixel range may come into play as well. So there'll be a bit of tension in the industry, which might make innovation more exciting.
And you know what I'm thinking is, okay, so I have an app called MyFitnessPal on my phone, and so do 200 million other people. So this company, they have a free version as well as a paid version, but they've got 200 million users, and basically it tracks your food as well as some other things, but its key value proposition is food tracking. And they bring in a revenue of around $370 million a year. And I was thinking this type of integration that Apple and now Samsung are having, in the past it's been, we'll collect this data and we'll show it to you in a graph. But now that they're both using AI to provide insights, notifications, tracking, actually providing real intelligence around that data rather than just putting numbers in front of you, I'm wondering in time, and maybe it won't take too long at all, that it'll be a massive disruptor to the health app market. Maybe instead of buying MyFitnessPal or deciding which one to buy, I don't buy any of them because now my Samsung or my Apple phone is just going to give me what I need. And I imagine a lot of those companies, if they're smart, will be positioning themselves as acquisition targets rather than thinking they compete with the people who actually give you the physical device that you put in your pocket.
That's right. I mean, you've seen there's been a lot of discussion around how the App Store controls apps that come on board and costs associated. So, yes, I guess from that perspective, it'd be very interesting for those tens of thousands of health and fitness apps that are currently on both the Apple App Store and the Android Play Store, how this changes their business model. And I'm sure quite a few of them sort of were a bit white-faced and distraught when they saw these announcements. I must admit, my logic was always been that if I download enough fitness apps and weight loss apps, I'll get fit and lose weight. It doesn't seem to work that way. It seems to be a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, that's how it works. Oh, it doesn't?
And we keep on talking about the need for this market to be regulated. So I guess regulation with large organizations like Apple and Samsung may take up a different level than it does with some small startups. But if I had shares in some of those companies, I'd probably be a little nervous now.
Yeah, or at least, as I said, if I'd be looking at acquisition. And what was interesting, one of the startups that I sought out and had a few conversations with in the health span longevity space, they haven't even raised a seed funding round. But what they've done is they've worked out really detailed formula looking at thousands of data points, including socioeconomic indicators of what could impact your health and well-being. So they're not just looking at what food you ingest, but a whole bunch of factors. So I was really impressed with them. And when I dropped in to see them just before I left the event, who was there? A guy from Samsung. And he had 3 other Samsung people. And what became clear was that he'd already had the pitch and was so impressed, he'd brought back his colleagues to meet and get the demo for themselves. And this is a company that, as I said, they haven't even raised a seed round yet.
If the Samsung guy was carrying a checkbook, those things still exist, they'd be very excited.
I would think so. All right, well, watch this space. For our next hot topic, Deloitte has surveyed 2,000 consumers to understand their experiences with virtual healthcare or telehealth. What they found is that consumers, they want to have virtual health available to them. In fact, a quarter of the people surveyed said that they would switch doctors to ensure access to virtual health options. So then Deloitte went and had a chat with health system executives, and they surveyed 51 of those about their virtual health services and their strategies. Even though this data all came out of the US, I think the results are pretty much what I've seen to be universal. Now, while many health systems are interested in and capable of offering telehealth, their organisational priorities are elsewhere, with many scaling back or completely discontinuing their virtual offerings. So does that sound familiar, Pulse Potties? Their report was targeted to the US market, so the advice was that health services need to prioritise convenience and address consumer preferences services if they want to be competitive in the market. Now, while that isn't necessarily the language or the economics in other health systems, I do think these lessons are universal. We've discussed these themes on the pod before. Consumers deserve to have choice, to be informed about their options, and to select services that they feel provide the highest level of not just care, but customer service. In my head, I think it's an unarguable position, and I know I'm not alone, but I'm not necessarily the majority in that opinion, because there does persist a stubborn section of the healthcare market that wants to maintain the status quo. And they seem quite actually sort of put out when some young upstart delivers a business model that actually does prioritise convenience and consumer preference. George, what do you think it's going to take for health systems to really put consumers in the centre of their businesses, not just in the centre of a Venn diagram on a strategic plan?
Great question, Louise. I mean, I guess this study was very interesting because of its disconnected response. I mean, consumers seem to be saying they want more virtual care. Healthcare systems seem to be saying we're dropping virtual care. I guess it's a bit of a, do what I say, not what I do type phenomenon. But it also calls into play to some degree the methodology, whether the polling way, the way they polled, where they did it online was really representative. I do note, however, when you sort of look into the detail of it, that more providers are providing more virtual services than those that are decreasing. So I think maybe the title was trying to be a bit more provocative than it needed to be. The providers' reasons are interesting. Clinician preference, reimbursement are up there, and that's reflected here highly in Australia. And I do agree very much with their conclusion, which is a pretty standard conclusion. There is still work to be done to bring virtual care to consumers. But I think we also need education for the providers. And the best education I can recommend for the providers is listen to Pulse Pod. You'll get to understand what consumers really want. And you're right. I mean, consumers are asking for this, and we're seeing generational change in consumers. And everyone keeps on popping up that example, but my 85-year-old grandmother never uses a phone. Yeah, but her 63-year-old son like me does. There are changes in play. And, what's that old famous hockey saying? Yeah, you skate to where the puck is going, not where the puck is. Yeah, you need to understand that the market is rapidly evolving. So I think we've done a great job here at Pulse Pod highlighting the value for consumers. We've had some really great consumer representatives on the interview panel with us. I think the industry needs to get with the times and just realize that consumer convenience is not a nice to have. It's now becoming a necessary to have.
Yeah. One of the reasons I'm really passionate about this topic is that I'm concerned that a new business pops up and they offer convenience, but I have to pay for that. And maybe I have a job, I can afford to pay for that, and I value the convenience. So great for me. But what about the people who can't afford to pay for those services? So I'm concerned that it actually could increase the disparity in accessibility and health outcomes to health services if there's a certain level of care and accessibility to people who can afford it, and then a model that's not so accessible or available to people who can't afford it. That concerns me.
It goes back to the discussion we had last podcast about the Commonwealth Fund report. I mean, lack of access is becoming a huge issue here in Australia. Access needs to be convenient. Access needs to fit in with our lifestyle. Access needs to fit in with our other demands. And we saw even yesterday there was some comments at the Q&A panel around less people using healthcare services less because of the cost. But if it's inconvenient to get to, if it's a hassle to make an appointment, if it's a hassle to get the right information, if you have to backwards and forwards to find the right pieces of information, all these sort of things lead to decreased access to care. And we know the outcomes of that are never positive. So we really need to think about this much more holistically.
All right. Well, we'll keep watching this space and we'll keep preaching to the choir, probably. But, the reason we bring it up, because, yes, I imagine Pulse Potties, we certainly haven't had any feedback. People don't agree with us. But hopefully we can give you ammunition so that when you're having discussions with people who are concerned about these changes and maybe standing in their way, that we can give you some ammunition to help with those conversations. Well, after this brief break, we will be back with our special guest of Pulse, Faye Filavaras, who is basically in charge of the digital enablement of Australia's entire aged care system. No small endeavour. Joining us in the Pulse Pod studio virtually in Canberra is Faye Filavaras. Faye is the First Assistant Secretary, Digital Transformation and Delivery, Aged Care Reform at the Department of Health and Aged Care. What that long title means is that Faye leads the Australian government's ambitious agenda to enable senior Australians, their families and aged care providers to have best-in-class digital experiences. which is no small undertaking, especially given the breadth of the sector and the need to better connect our aged care ecosystem, much of which is actually made up of small to medium-sized businesses. This transformation also has an internal focus for the department, which is looking at transforming capabilities and culture internally. Faye has much experience in innovation and digital transformations at scale. They're not new to her, as she has had senior leadership roles in the private sector, including banking and technology. Welcome to Pulse, Faye.
Thanks for having me, Louise and George.
So good that you could be here. So, Faye, firstly, we always like to hear from our guests a bit about their personal experience as well as what they do now. So could you tell us a little bit about your career before you joined the department and what drove you to get involved in technology?
I started in university with a Bachelor of Computer Science. I was probably one of the only females who attended that computer science degree. I might be showing my age there a little bit because I think the world has changed a little bit since then. And then I went into banking and capital market sector. So my career in the private sector started in banking, margin lending, insurance. And you'll notice I talk about all the different business sectors that I've been in because I think technology has been about how do we solve for business problems. That's probably been my focus throughout my career. So I've gone on to learn a lot about how funds management works or insurance or pensions and banking and trading and retail and credit cards and all sorts of things. And so for me, it's about problem solving more than it is about technology. It's like, how do we do new things in a new way?
So, Faye, I think it's fair to say that the tech world is still fairly male-dominated. How does a young girl from a migrant background, and I assume not too many computer people in the family, get to where you are now? What were the steps in your progress?
You're right. Not too many people in my family. I think I was the first in my family to go to university. I was never really a writer. So for me, I think technology and computing fit more of my systems thinking, my scientific mind. I was always curious and wanted to know how things worked. So yes, I went to university full-time while I supported my parents in their own fruit business. So I was working full-time while studying full-time. So that was definitely like the European or cultural thing to do. And I think with a migrant background, I think that does come across. I know I speak English really well and I can communicate on the surface, but I think sometimes my culturally and linguistically diverse background means that I look at things in a different way. And then I just progress through. Yes, it's been very male orientated. I've often been the only female at the board table, and it does require you to be very tempered and courageous in the way that you put forward ideas because you are a different voice in that sense. And I think, though, I just own it and be my own authentic self. And I think in the long run, it works for me because my background being sort of family orientated, we spent a lot of time at work and I use that to bring people together. So work is not just somewhere you go and check in and check out, but where you spend time with people. And so teaming and bringing people together is an important part of the job for me. So where I work and who I work with is very important.
Thanks for sharing all of that, Faye. I'd love to ask you more about on those topics, but this is not a feminism or a leadership podcast. So
save that for another day.
Yes, I'll start that podcast another time. We'll get you on for that show. But sticking with your career journey in relation to innovation and technology, you did make that jump from the commercial world to public service, which is seen to be a really large change. What was it that drove you to, as we like to say, come over from the dark side of commercial to the light side of public service? Was there someone or something that influenced you in that decision?
I think after 25 years experience in the private sector, coming over to public service to work on something like the aged care reform was that role with a purpose, something for me to give back. It was about 5 years ago I started in Services Australia before moving across to aged care. I did COVID for 18 months there and then came across. I think for me it was the idea that I could do a transformation for the nation and really affect change in a profound way that would help people. So that's why I jumped across.
So coming from the very hardcore technology world of banking and finance and coming over to the Department of Health and Aged Care. What was your first reaction when you saw the current status of technology and digital in that sector when you came over?
I was a bit surprised. I had a few people, unlike yourself, George, say that it wasn't new. And I think the timing of the move saw me join just not long after the Royal Commission into Aged Care and Quality Safety Commission's final report came down. So sometimes I think these things are very serendipitous. As we know, we launched us into the aged care reform after that report, and many of those reform measures were going to depend on good digital foundations underpinning them. And so I think for me, it was like, yeah, the timing was great. So we looked at the digital capabilities that were in the sector and in our own department and thought, well, what do we have to do here to make a difference? We saw things like issues with fragmented and incomplete data. So the confidence in the information wasn't always there when it came to policy and making decisions in your own organisations. And there's a few reasons for why we were where we were, like the sector not having direct access to the information government held about them. So it was hard for them to keep that information updated without picking up the phone and manually spending their valuable time telling us about what's changing in their data. Also, expenditure on things like technology access and linking systems together had not really kept pace or hadn't really been prioritised. So leaving parties underprepared for the grey tsunami of data. And it pointed towards having the department develop software and systems to enable automatic reporting and investing in new infrastructure so that we could put good data principles in place as well. So when I joined back in 2022, early in the journey, we needed to create that delivery engine that was there but was modest, and we needed to amplify and really sort of scale it. Historically, our department was a policy shop and had little to do with digital delivery. And so a lot of the internal information was needed before we could properly deliver for the aged care sector. And so that was my first task. It meant thinking about our culture, the way we worked, the skills we had, and of course the technology internally. And then we needed to turn our attention to, well, how would we do that with the sector? I think the investment early has paid dividends now where everyone is guided by our North Star that we've put out there to connect and modernise and automate the aged care ecosystem for our better outcomes. And I've always been confident in the mission that we've set out to achieve together. And through collaborating with the sector, it's clear everyone wants to succeed. Everyone has been so generous with their time working with us. It's just having clear guardianship and stewardship around that so that we do it together. So my overall reaction was there was a lot to do and a lot to get done in a very short amount of time. But I think if I look back now, we've achieved so much together. And I think that set us up really well for the next 2 years of change that we have to do.
I have to admit, 2022, when the appointment of First Assistant Secretary for Digital Transformation in Aged Care, which was a mouthful, but also a revolutionary new role, you're right. Up to that date, most of our engagement with the department had been around policy. But obviously the organisation itself is transforming. And just recently, you've been updated to the Acting Chief Digital Information Officer for the Department of Health and Aged Care. So obviously your transformation goes beyond just the technology, but changing the whole system of how it's managed internally. Tell us a bit about what the new role entails and how the transformation within the department is driving that change.
So let's start with my role in the Digital Transformation and Delivery Division, which was solely focused on aged care transformation program at the time and some of the internal capabilities we needed to mature so that we could respond to such a large program at scale. I was responsible for a workforce of just over 1,000 people working to deliver key outcomes laid out in the Royal Commission and from the government's aged care agenda. New platforms such as the Government Provider Management System and Business to Government Gateway, the integrated assessment tool and the continual investment in my aged care were all built by the team of 1,000 strong people. And all of the co-design that we did with the sector. I really can't stop emphasising that. We didn't build it alone. We did it in conjunction with the sector, replacing old systems with modern cloud-based counterparts, which allowed for streamlining the reporting, improving some of that data quality we talked about, and ultimately to get better outcomes for older people in Australia and for those who are caring for them. The new Chief Digital Information Officer role is one for health and aged care in its totality. It aligns our two digitally focused divisions, so the DTD I just mentioned, and our IT division under one banner. One big difference is the new role having a focus that's solely digital. This gives us a holistic end-to-end view of all the digital delivery in the department, recognises the increased importance of digital and ICT solutions in delivering on the department's outcomes. And it also helps improve alignment and decision-making both internally and with the broader government, and allows us to pool our resources and create efficiencies across the two large IT divisions. It's pretty exciting for everyone, and it's a big change. So we're all stepping through it slowly and carefully, making sure we keep our eye on all the commitments that we've already made. But slowly, this change will lead to better health outcomes for all Australians, given it extends our approach in aged care across all of our other programs of work as well. So exciting times. Watch this space.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge agenda. Aged care has always been the poor cousin of healthcare system in Australia. In other jurisdictions around the world, they're more closely linked. One of the key challenges that I'm sure that you face on a daily basis is that in aged care, you guys don't actually deliver any of the care. Like, at least in state health departments, they actually do deliver care as well. But rather, you need to use financial, regulatory, compliance. You have to move levers around all the time because you don't deliver the care yourselves, but you have to encourage changes in the sector.
You're right. So state and Commonwealth do work together within the federated model. When it comes to our relationship with state counterparts, we do work very closely with them. Just last week, I was in Adelaide and had a very productive discussion with Digital Health SA about what they're doing in aged care. And we shared our different perspectives and the work we're doing and how we could work better together on a few things. There's some really interesting work happening there around setting up platforms for themselves. Being able to measure is pretty key in that sense. Without that, we don't know if we're making progress or if the work we're doing is in the right direction. So ultimately, good data and information is really important. Good policy, which leads to great care outcomes. It's no different to providers tapping into sensor technology or other data points, bringing that all together to find competitive edges and opportunities to improve care delivery. So for us, the products we are building are directly helping to measure what's happening so we can ensure high quality care for older Australians. Our new systems let us measure what's happening across aged care through the data that we collect. With GPMS, it means that we now have accurate, timely data about providers nationally. It's self-serve, and so that they can report their information to us, and then we analyse that data. Star ratings is a good example of data that we collect and then we put out there, and we measure the improvement of providers, which there has been an upward trajectory on that, which is fantastic. And then with B2G, we can automate that process and make reporting even easier so providers don't have to swivel chair between their own systems and ours, and they can automatically feed it in from theirs using the software and beyond. So we can measure how much time is being saved as well. It takes them, 5 hours to do some reporting manually versus they can press a button and it automatically tells us. So our ability to measure what's happening in the sector has grown. We can already see some significant steps forward. To take a couple of examples for you, real measurement points, aged care residents are now receiving 3.9 million minutes more direct care every day. 19% more aged care homes are receiving an overall star rating of 4 or 5 based on the movement from when we originally reported on star ratings till today. And almost 60% of care homes are now rated good or excellent, which is absolutely better outcomes for those who are getting the care. It was also important to improve our own data shop and our own analytical abilities. So we've invested in our own tools so we can make effective use of that data. After all, if we left the data there for just an annual report, it would be a waste. We want to make sure we can get up-to-date analytics to inform quick policy change in a rapidly evolving environment. So looking forward, data is so important as we move forward.
So reflecting on that, the Royal Commission was a real eye-opener for the entire industry. It highlighted obviously a lot of issues, but it also highlighted some core business issues. That fact that collecting data was complicated, delivering that data to the department was very complicated. When I was with the Aged Care Technology Council, we did the report. We saw that the providers were spending hours and hours just basically packaging data in a format to get it into the department. So it's really exciting watching this transformation, enabling real-time data. We were so used to reading reports based on data 2 or 3 years old rather than what's happening now. Star ratings has been a game changer in that space. Then we're actually starting to see real-time data. And the Royal Commission actually did focus on technology. I mean, you often joke to people that I'm one of the few Greek people in Sydney named in a Royal Commission who hasn't been arrested. So it's really good to be engaged with the Royal Commission. And the work they did was great. But the core output of all that, of course, is the new Act. The new Act is currently in Parliament. I know it's going through a few changes and still it hasn't finally been voted on. But there seems to be a strong focus on getting it through. And that's going to change the way that aged care is paid for, the way it's regulated, and the way it's evaluated. How important is it that the system goes digital so that we can actually do that in near real time rather than, like you pointed out, a whole bunch of reports based on past results?
I think it's hugely important. I know, at least if I talk about the government systems first, I think definitely we need to be digital. We need to make sure that all the new changes that will be in the Act and Support at Home are built so that we can enable the system to work and function. And then if you look at it from provider land, you guys do need to be really digital to some extent if you want to be efficient. I know there's different maturity levels across the ecosystem and some people do things manually and some don't. But if we want to be serious, digitizing now means we keep the momentum going for generational change for aged care. You could probably get away with not being digital in some aspects, but our role in government isn't just to lay out the regulation. We're here to position the sector to succeed. And we're looking at opportunities to uplift providers with enabling tools so they can do what they do best, which is deliver care and not have to focus too much on the administrative overhead in that sense. And we're open to partnering with sector to better understand their needs. So Sector Partners is a great example of our work there, as well as our co-delivery processes in our releases. And I said it earlier, we don't achieve anything on our own. We could probably deliver some digital tech, but then adopting it out in the sector, we want to make sure that the adoption is easier and it fits. So digitizing the system end to end from assessment to end of life saves a lot of manual labour, makes the job of regulation easier, and also improves, most importantly, the quality of care being delivered in the system. It improves the user experience, meaning an easier journey for aged care workers, for providers, and for those older Australians getting the care and their families. It allows aged care to link more broadly into the health ecosystem. And I know that we're just starting on that and there's more to do, but it's the beginning, which is great. With our new health identifiers being put into My Aged Care, it allows us to connect more broadly. We've worked with the Australian Digital Health Agency to integrate My Health Record with My Aged Care in that sense. So that means we're working with the department to ensure that the care support plans are made available to other broader allied health. And we're also looking to partner more broadly with Veterans Affairs and NDIA and the Quality Safety Commission to see how we can deploy a more holistic view for providers across the healthcare landscape as well. So just some other smaller priorities in the background while we deliver aged care reform. So the new Act and Support at Home is big in ensuring Aged Care Australia is future-proofed with sustainable funding and putting the rights of older people first. But aged care is not isolated from the rest of healthcare, so we need to keep looking at building those broader connections. So hopefully under my new role, acting CDIO while I'm in the seat, that ties a little bit into this work, making sure the aged care learnings are shared across the board and vice versa. We learn from what's happening in digital health and bring it in to bring that ecosystem closer together.
That is all very exciting. And like I said, as an old doctor and Louise, as a much younger occupational therapist, we understand the need to integrate healthcare and aged care is critical, and it's really exciting. And you discussed about the generational change, and that's one of the challenges we do face going forward. So the current generation receiving aged and healthcare services aren't digital natives. But as people like me start coming into the system, we're going to have greater demands on the system. We're all fairly digital savvy. We're used to our smart TVs and our phones and our gadgets at home. How are you preparing for that next generation of aging, the younger baby boomers, as they call them, who are basically going to be much more digitally enabled and want to interact more? Obviously, you're having the back-end systems ready for that is important, and that's where you're up to now. But new innovative ways of delivering aged care services. Is the department supporting those sort of ideas?
Absolutely. There's a lot of people out there getting closer, or if it's not the individual, it's like having someone who's digitally native who has a parent and they want to access their service on their behalf. So digital maturity isn't just for providers, but it's for everyone. Digital, the way it works in other areas of our life, we want to start bringing some of that digital way of experience into aged care. And so I know you're digitally savvy, but not everyone accessing aged care is or will be sometimes. And we still have a mandate to offer people equal access to aged care, no matter their background, ethnicity, or location, rural, regional, or digital experience. So we want to make it equitable for everyone to be able to get access. And that's why we're still offering an omni-channel approach to entering the system, whilst many people will always simply prefer the person-to-person interaction sometimes, but there's always going to be room for that. How do we get more digitally connected and easily accessible on those services? So to your point, we know the next generation is coming who's going to be more digitally savvy at a baseline. And so at the same time, for the generation after that, who are definitely more connected, they'll want to take more control. So we need to be in a position where we enable that, right? We're already seeing solutions sitting outside of government and traditional aged care providers where apps which older people can access to build their own care journey, deciding what they want and what their preferences are, or whether it's be care planning or health monitoring or other innovations, monitoring in the home as we support people in their homes for longer. We do expect future generations to have this knowledge at their fingertips, and so we need to make sure we're all working towards making that part of the care solutions. To help with that, we're building the interoperability agendas into our digital foundations, enabling our systems to talk to other systems, which will help bring key enablement around innovations. And it's going to be easier to access and share that information over a range of digital services with the individual's consent on who they want their information to be shared with. Innovation in care access and delivery is something we want to support and amplify. The aged care data and digital strategy the department put out this year calls this out. We're doing a few experiments to try and help enable that and showcase what digital can do for people, how we can help older people and their support networks navigate and actively participate in their care and well-being. A lot of this work focuses on translating like emerging technology, providing supporting tools and improving digital and health literacy. So those experiments, we're playing those out to see how they can be leveraged and what people think about them. And whilst in Adelaide last week, I met with Aged Care Research and Industry Innovation Australia about their work supporting aged care innovation. Some of the examples were great, and they just didn't focus on the aged care providers. It also focused on individuals accessing care too, through care apps and all sorts of things. So, yeah, I'm really excited by the possibilities. George, I can see you are as well.
Absolutely looking forward to it. And it's interesting because Louise just came back from Vegas. So Louise, AARP did a great big thing there around innovative age tech. So anything to report from there? And how do you think we can do the same thing here? And I'll put it in my little plug for the upcoming ITAC event next year where we'll be discussing this in the future.
Well, I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this, Faye, and it's a good segue from your comments about what you saw in South Australia because, I was at this massive conference, over 10,000 people there, all sorts of different types of technology in healthcare was showcased, massive expo hall, but a significant amount of the program content and the stuff that was being showcased, we're looking at innovation in aged tech, seems to be taking off around the world. There's a lot of interest in that longevity and health span space related to it as well. So, what are your thoughts about what do we need to do in Australia to make us a leader in that space?
Wow, it's a big one. From a government perspective, it's important we give the aged care sector and its innovators an enabling environment. So being open about it first. We need to leverage the momentum following the Royal Commission to keep innovating and striving for better outcomes. I heard a statement recently around digital transformation. It's not a sprint or a marathon. It is an ongoing journey. And for those that think that people say we need to change while the iron is hot, but I think we actually need to go, this was just the beginning of the journey, and it's been 3 years and we need to continue it, because digital transformation is that ongoing looking at business models and how we continuously improve and evolve, because the technology is running just so fast and there's always opportunity. The department is looking at ways to encourage this innovation and provide stewardship. So an example of this is looking at AI and innovation frameworks to set guidelines and promote trials in promising areas. When we experiment with the technology, we need to keep the guardrails and the policies in mind, because sometimes the technology is really powerful and really easy to use, and then we might miss the risk of the consequences when we're using it. We're also looking at technology pilots for artificial intelligence and virtual reality in care delivery, which can then inform further recommendations, innovations. So I think everyone should get involved. Everyone should free up a little bit of headspace, 10% of your time, to experiment on how to do things differently. I think people are a big part of making sure that change happens. And so unless they've got the time to immerse themselves in it, it's really difficult to change, because we don't have the time for it and we're not aware of all the capability. When we're doing all this experimentation, we need to make sure privacy and safety comes first. And different people have different appetites for some of this technology in their sphere. And in government, we must consider the ethical and legislative implications of the innovation, making sure we're innovating in, like, what I call safe ways in that sense. So while it's good to push forward with building the revolutionary technology that we want to build, I think it has to be done co-designed with the people, with all that legislative or policy in mind, so that we do it safely and that everyone enjoys the experience and that technology is not just thrust on them.
And I think full transparency is important as well, so that people can, opt in or choose not to, as the case may be.
That's it. But I think we need to look at it as the change is inevitable. Change is coming whether we want it or not. So we should engage with the change. We do it with a risk lens on it, so that's safe and secure, and that we really look to the opportunity that it can provide.
And I know Louise mentioned transparency, and that's one of the things that you've really championed in the department. So with your regular tech talks and our digital transformation sector meetings every fortnight, that transparency has been a great thing. I think that's a really important discussion. But on behalf of both of us, look, that's been a great discussion.
Thank you so much for joining us, Faye. It's been great to have you on the show, and we are doing what we can, obviously really spearheaded by George, to highlight the great work and the huge amount of work that is happening in the aged care sector around digital transformation. So it's great to have you on the show. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great.
Now it's time for an update from our correspondent, Kate McDonald from the Pulse IT News Desk. Hi, Kate. How are you today?
Fantastic, as always. For the last 6 months or so, we've been doing some pretty intensive reporting in Pulse IT about the problems facing the New Zealand digital health sector. We've always covered New Zealand in Pulse IT, but there's been a lot going on this year, including some pretty drastic cuts to the budget for data and digital that was announced back in May, totaling $380 million, which is a hell of a lot for a small health system like New Zealand's. This has pretty much decimated Health New Zealand's flagship HERA program, which, while not particularly well articulated, this platform, it has been doing some really important work on interoperability and making information available to patients through their own My Health app. They didn't follow Australia's lead with the My Health record, but that seems to be in a bit of danger of not going ahead now. While this has concerned a lot of people, some of the veterans in the industry are not too fussed, to tell you the truth. They believe that the funding and the HERA program itself was a bit misguided. Our friend Tom Bowden, who founded HealthLink, which is a secure messaging service, he's in this corner. He argues that there are existing solutions out there that can be used to open up access to patient information and work towards an interoperable system without the large cost. New Zealand has old infrastructure for health IT, and it's estimated that it could cost up to $2 billion to bring it up to scratch. New Zealand doesn't have that sort of money. However, things have since come to a head, I'm afraid, with the disestablishment of the position of Chief Data and Digital Officer, which saw poor old Lee Donoghue summarily disestablished, I'm afraid. Australian potties will know Lee really well from his time heading up Accenture and his very long involvement in digital health here, particularly with HISA and the Australian Institute of Digital Health. Lee went over to New Zealand with grand plans to help them fix up some of the very ancient tech platforms there, which he colourfully described as ugly babies and old bangers. I think that got the health minister's attention, and he helped write a strategy to bring it up to scratch. However, with the election of a new government with an austerity mindset, that seems to have all been set on fire, I'm afraid. Last week, our reporter, Rish Lyon, who's been doing fabulous work on all the ins and outs of this drama, he had himself a bit of a scoop. He discovered that the Health Minister, Shane Retty, who is a GP and knows the health system intimately, he was warned before the budget cuts that they could leave the health system open to cybersecurity concerns, and the lack of funding for various programs could see them shut down completely. The fear was it could put patient data at risk. Health New Zealand says everything is fine, as does Dr. Retty himself, repeating over and over again that once Health New Zealand completes a 10-year strategy for infrastructure investment, things will become more clear. We don't hold out a great deal of hope, actually. There's quite a lot of jaw clenching and teeth grinding about all of this that's been going on. Rish wrote a great blog about it the weekend just gone, and they got a lot of comments. Unfortunately, though, our poll found that 85% of respondents thought digital health progress will be impeded by the budget cuts in New Zealand. It's not a great state of affairs at the moment for our cousins across the pond. Speaking of which, we've also been following the moves in the UK. Keir Starmer's big announcement that he was going to move the NHS England from analogue to digital a reality. I think the NHS is already halfway there. They just need some decent legislation to allow them to share information, and that will probably be coming. We wish them very good luck. Meanwhile, Ireland is likely to have an election in late November, and its legislation to enable health data sharing is a bit bogged down in the Dáil, their parliament, and probably won't see the light of day until next year. But we have a lot more confidence that Ireland will go ahead with its big plans to transform its health system. And back in Australia, we've had a few good stories on virtual care, which we talked about earlier. There was a report out from KPMG saying that virtual hospitals could save $1 billion a year by 2030, and there should be more investment in it. Now, this report was commissioned by a certain health insurer that is heavily involved in virtual hospitals, so they wanted to see more investment from the government in particular, but it was based on good data from a Cochrane meta-analysis. So we think that the finances are probably sound in this report. Every state and territory is investing in virtual wards or virtual hospitals or hospital in the home in Australia. It's separate from, traditionally delivered GP telehealth, but virtual hospitals are taking off, including in Western Australia, which this week they officially opened their new State Health Operations Centre, or SHOC. The SHOC will house WA's virtual emergency department, or WAVED. So we're enjoying the punning opportunities that the shockwave is providing to us at the moment. And also, this will be of great interest. We can perhaps cover this next time. There's a new report out this week on gender equity in digital health in Australia, and also a new framework for clinical coders, which was released at this week's Health Information Management Conference in Melbourne. All of the health information managers and clinical coders are gathered there, and the hot topics are EMRs and AI, naturally. We've also done a bit of a preview this week of the AI in Community Care Conference in Brisbane that George is attending as a media delegate, as a podcaster. Have you got your fedora and press pass ready for that, George? He does.
This is when you wish the podcast was a visual medium. I'm going to have to take a screenshot of that. Nice hat, George.
Yes, looking forward to that event and looking forward to wearing my press fedora for the very first time, representing Pulse IT as a media delegate. And I have to ask those hard questions. I need some help, Kate, on asking those hard searching questions.
Oh, no problem whatsoever.
There's so much you covered, Kate. You give such wonderful updates. Thank you. in the UK, I was having a look around what's happening there with health reform, and they have started that national online conversation to inform their 10-year plan. If you haven't seen it, guys, I'll put a link to the show notes, but they've set up this website and it's open for anyone to put comments in, and they prompt you a bit about the topics you might want to address. There's over 45,000 people on this website who are putting in conversation starters, but there has been some pretty hilarious ones. So putting beer on tap in hospitals was one. They could raise money by firing the health minister out of a cannon to raise funds. And for all of those football fans, putting the Arsenal manager in charge of the NHS was another suggestion, which I thought was pretty amusing.
They also suggested appointing Larry the Cat as the health secretary, which was very popular apparently. And I think there was also some dodgy comments about allowing GPs to amend a patient's will so that they're not unfairly excluded from getting an inheritance when the patient dies. And that was signed by one Dr. H. Shipman, which was amusing, a bit off.
Oh, no.
You've got to love our comic friends. They do have a wonderful sense of humour. And as a Gunners fan, I mean, I don't want to lose the Arsenal manager, so they can get the Tottenham manager. He's Australian as well. It's interesting. One of the things that also came up is this concept of a single patient record. And I'm a little concerned that when King Charles was out here last week, someone took him to the Digital Health Agency and showed him our My Health record. And he's gone back and sort of said, oh, chaps, we should do this. Yeah. So and maybe royal decree is the way you get things done in England nowadays.
It could be. I saw that as well because Open Notes were promoting it. But when I looked into it, it's like, no, that's their plan. They're not actually doing it yet.
It's better than having a concept of a plan.
Well, that is true. Yes.
I think the UK will get there. We should remember that they're talking about NHS England health system is devolved in the UK and Scotland is not having any part of this. Northern Ireland is doing interesting stuff in rolling an Epic EMR, and they're already giving patients access to a shared health record. So each of the 4 different countries that make up the UK are doing different things. But the NHS England had a history. Anyone who's worked in digital health for a long time knows about their history of a few big disasters they've had in the past and things that haven't gone ahead, like the care.data program, which was set up to link up GP and hospital records that didn't come to fruition. But they've done some brilliant work on standards and we think they'll make it this time, hopefully.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's good. And unlike our poor friends in New Zealand.
Poor New Zealand.
Although I do note that when their last disaster happened, a lot of their people came over to Australia and some of them went to New Zealand, and whether they're going to go back to England now. So it could be a very cyclical, what happens in digital health stays in digital health.
And Ireland, we've got our new Pulse IT Irish edition. Really interesting stuff happening there. And of course, the government there has been told to accept 13 billion euros from Apple for whatever purposes they want to use it for. And cool. I can tell you that digital health is one of the big ones that putting their hands up for a bit of that.
Big shopping list.
Yes. Thank you, Apple.
Nice. Thanks, Kate. Wonderful update as always. So much going on in the digital health sector. You and the team are doing a great job of covering it all in Pulse IT. So thanks for bringing a small part of it to the Pulse Pod.
Anytime. Love it.
George, we had another jam-packed episode. Faye was amazing. You have a story about how you met Faye. Is that right?
There is a bit of a funny story there. So as you can tell by Faye's surname, she's obviously of Greek background like myself. And back in 2022, when they first announced the appointment of the First Assistant Secretary of Faye Flavaris, and being on the Aged Care Technology Council, it came to my attention, I had to do a bit of homework because I thought, hang on, that name sounds familiar. Now, there is a Greek singer in Sydney called Steve Flavaris. I'm a big fan of Steve. I went to many, many of his shows. He used to perform monthly at the St. George League. And I saw his name, this Flavaris. And so I thought, I better check with Steve to make sure, is there any connection here? Because, Steve's a rock star in the industry. And so I reached out to him and he told me that the Faye is actually his sister-in-law.
Oh, cool.
And he actually helped facilitate the connection. And we've had quite a few chats around that. And in the Greek community, we don't talk about 6 levels of separation. We only talk about 1. Everybody knows everybody. So Faye is one of those people that I've gotten to know.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, wow. I love it. And an actual rock star.
He is, yes. If you're ever in Sydney and Steve's playing, I can highly recommend we go and see Steve doing his Greek rock and roll.
Oh, cool. Oh, yeah. I'd love that. We should set that up. Okay, well, when we record and produce this next episode, George, will there be a new US president?
Yes. I've been watching with great interest.
What was interesting in the US, just a small observation, usually people want to talk about politics, and there's Republican and Democrat leaning people in healthcare. It's not all one way or the other. But this trip, I found no one wanted to talk about it. And the reason I know that, because they weren't raising it. And whenever I did, I felt bad. Like I felt I was doing like a moral injury to them. If I asked someone like, how are you feeling? What's your take? And everyone didn't want to talk about it. And like everyone's just basically depressed, regardless of which way you vote. Like the state of affairs is not good and everyone's pretty sad about it. So we will see. It might be a while before they have an election winner, but they should have one by the time our next podcast comes to air. We will see.
Will be very interesting to watch. I do reflect because back in 2008 when I was working for a US company, and I was actually in the US a couple of times during that whole rise of Obama. And that was just such an exciting time in the United States. You could just feel the energy. And yeah, it's disappointing that that's no longer there.
No, it's not. All right, but we will see. Okay, well, until next time, George, can you read us out?
Thank you for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Thanks to Nigel Charteris, Emily Mara and Kate McDonald for contributing to today's episode. Subscribe, follow and rate Pulse wherever you get your podcasts. You can subscribe to Pulse IT magazine at www.pulseit.news. Please send your feedback and questions to pulsepod@pulseit.news.